and it's come down to this. It's game 1, it's game 7, it's all 7 games at the same time on Tuesday night in Toronto. We go north of the border to a Canadian-born baseball player as well as a broadcaster for the Toronto Blue Jays. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Siddle Joe. He is Joe Siddle, one of our defending champions, and certainly this one is weird. It's a weird managing game, right, Joe? I mean, because it is sort of all the marbles wrapped into one. You do have a bunch of rested pitchers. It creates for a different kind of atmosphere, doesn't it?
Well, it sure does when it comes to one game, and I know a lot of people that are against the whole one-game wild card. I've always got an answer for that, and that's play better. Win your division. To me, there's incentive to win the division in the AL East, and we all know how difficult that is. The Orioles know the feeling, the Blue Jays know the feeling, and the Red Sox know the feeling too, and Boston went ahead and took off. They were the team to do it this season, and now, of course, the Orioles and Blue Jays going at it. But it really tells you how difficult this division is, and what a classic matchup. Of course, the Orioles and the Blue Jays have had some great rivals. And, anytime I talk to Blue Jays players, particularly pitchers, and just really asking them how difficult it is, think about an Aaron Sanchez and a Jay Happ and a Marco Estrada. These guys, what they've done in this Blue Jays rotation. But I think what people have to remember is they're doing this in the AL East. And most pitchers and some of the relief pitchers, Jason Gurley one, they say that every night it's like a heavyweight title bout facing these AL East lineups, and especially in these ballparks. And it's going to be no different against the Orioles. But that's the way it is. It's got to be the toughest division, certainly to pitch in baseball. Blue Jays have had a lot of success, and I don't want to say that they're hobbling into this game, but this bullpen has really been taxed despite the great success of the Blue Jays rotation, but I'm sure they'll be called upon again at the biggest time of year.
Well, it was a fascinating run to the finish, right? Because other than the Cubs, nobody else really had it easy. You know, the Dodgers and the Nationals were sort of fighting to stay away from the Cubs. In the American League, everybody was fighting for everything. I find it fascinating that the Red Sox really did fizzle down the line, and they could have ousted the Blue Jays, and instead, the Blue Jays played their best baseball over the weekend. The Red Sox needed those games. They didn't want to go to Cleveland and play Game 1 this weekend. So, all of that being said, when it comes to choosing your pitchers, the Blue Jays don't have their best guys available. The Orioles have their best guys at least rested, and it's any given week who's the best guy. I mean, the fact that we're sitting here talking about Ubaldo Jimenez as being potentially the best guy, but we're taping this before the pitching selections were picked. But Liriano and Stroman, this is a tough decision on your side of the fence as well, right?
Well, I think so. And the one benefit I think the Blue Jays have probably over the Orioles in that starting pitching selection is the Blue Jays rotation is so good all the way through. And I said it like about a week ago, however this thing shakes down. If it's a wild card game for the Blue Jays, I'll take any one of them. Really, they've all been pitching fairly well. And Liriano had a great game against the Orioles last week. Marcus Stroman pitched pretty well. I think it's going to be one of the two. It's Stroman's day in terms of rotation, but I think with what Liriano did and being a left-hander, and the Orioles lineup tends to struggle against left-handed pitching, I'm guessing that's the way it's going to go. It's going to be very interesting. I think whatever pitcher whoever's chosen, the other one will be in the bullpen, and that's where it becomes an all-hands-on-deck sort of thing. It's one game, and there's not a whole lot of room for error. And I think with these lineups, even though they've both been kind of hobbling into the playoffs, which is kind of hard to say when you're talking about the Orioles and the Blue Jays offensively, but they certainly still do both have that quick strike capability, and especially with the long ball. And if things get on the board, if one team scores a few early, I got to believe a starting pitcher is going to be out of there in a hurry because there's just no room to give him time to figure things out.
Yeah, my heart doesn't break for the Indians or the Nationals or some of these other teams that have had really heinous injuries down the line to pitchers, to catchers, to key position players. The Orioles don't feel that right now. I mean, we've had Adam Jones hurt this year. We've had Hardy hurt this year. We've had Machado hurt in previous years. Last time we got in this situation, Wieters, Davis, and Machado weren't playing in the ALCS 2 years ago. Markakis took the pitch off the wrist 4 years ago. You look back on that and say that might have been a difference maker for the Orioles in beating the Yankees in that 2012 playoff, but the Orioles are pretty healthy coming into this thing, and I think for that, and the pitching has trended in the better direction really over the last 2 months. It's fascinating that Jimenez is a guy, at least if not under consideration to start, he would be the first guy coming out, and Tillman as well, that you want to have rested guys, you want to have your best guys, but I don't think Happ and these other guys for the Blue Jays, they're not going to factor into this game on Tuesday.
No, I don't think so, just because they pitched on the weekend in Boston. But, you get down to a one game, And really, I think numbers for the season, they really go out the window. You've got to go with the hot hand. And I'll take anyone. And everyone kind of mocks at the name Ubaldo Jimenez. Well, he basically threw a gem at the Blue Jays last Thursday here in Toronto, and he had just the Blue Jays lineup stymied into the seventh inning. So it is all about the hot hand, and I know he really came out of nowhere basically this season, sent to the bullpen, came back to the rotation, and what a bright light he's been for the Orioles. So if that's the choice, the Blue Jays will have their hands full. And I always say that it's an advantage, I think, to the hitters if they've just seen a pitcher recently or seen them a lot, just because of that familiarity, as opposed to pitchers facing a lineup maybe the hitters have not seen. I always give the edge to the pitchers, but the hitters should have the edge in this ball game. They're going to face a pitcher that's familiar to them, that they know, but it all comes down to execution on any given one day. And have to borrow a phrase from hockey, but the hot goalie wins games in hockey. And I think Tuesday night, when we talk about this ball game, whoever the starting pitcher is, I have a feeling on one side, a starting pitcher is going to throw a very good ball game. I know from the Blue Jays' perspective, they need to win a six-inning ball game because they do not want to get into that Orioles bullpen if Baltimore has the lead. So for me, I wonder if John Gibbons might manage a little bit differently, maybe work for a run early or two and try to get on the board. But I really think for the Blue Jays, bottom line, the game plan is to have the lead in the sixth inning, or they're going to be in big trouble.
Joe Siddall, our Canadian friend and former big leaguer. He does the Blue Jays broadcast. You can follow him out on Twitter at SiddleJoe. That's SiddleJoe out on Twitter. What'd you make of the fight last week with the Yankees? I mean, I was sitting at Buffalo Wild Wings eating some wings in Owings Mills, as we do every Monday night for our Monday night broadcast and our best seat in the house and our wing eating. And I look up and there's brawling going on, and I'm like, boy, this isn't very smart. And the Blue Jays almost sort of like that tough guy thing. They almost want to mix it up. The Royals are a little bit like that. But these teams that get in fights, they tend to not be able to avoid them, even when it winds up costing them.
Well, yeah, and I think, too, maybe more was made of it than should have been. I think what's happened here, and most people, when they refer to this fight, when they look at the highlights, everyone sees Josh Donaldson get hit by the pitch from Severino, and it just nicked his elbow pad on the front elbow. A lot of players wear the gear now, the protective gear. And really, that was, I don't think, at all the story. I think the story has been brewing for a while. I think it's been brewing around the Blue Jays clubhouse. I just feel that the Blue Jays have been pitched very differently this year for me. And when I say very differently, last year they had this prolific offense, and they just hammered teams left, right, and center. This year it's been very different. They have not been quite as prolific. And I think part of it is, number one, the expectations. Everyone just rolled out of spring training, me included, thinking this is going to be a great offense. And, hopefully the pitching holds up. But I think teams have been on alert, and they've watched video, and they've studied this team. And I think this power-laden right-handed lineup has been pounded inside a little bit more. And as a former catcher, I think you have to do that to good lineups. I think you got to do it to the Orioles lineup. And I think what's happened throughout the course of the season is guys have been getting buzzed a little bit. Josh Donaldson, for one. And when I say buzzed, I'm talking knocked down. He's been hit in the face one time. And, as a hitter, that stuff gets old. You don't mind pitchers pitching inside. We understand that that's what you have to do to have success. And it's a little bit of a different era now. We're starting to see more and more hitters in this era object to being pitched inside. But when you're getting hit, but not only getting hit, but getting buzzed and knocked down on several occasions, and that's what I've been noticing a little bit more this year. It's not that their teams are pitching a lot of high percentage pitches inside, but they're showing inside enough to get those Blue Jays hitters conscious in there so that they can get them out over the plate. That's not the way it was last year. So it kind of came to a head when Donaldson got nipped there. And Jay Happ just felt it was time that he do something about it. So that's when he drilled Chase Headley. And warnings were issued. I thought everything was over with. As a player, normally it's kind of that tit-for-tat thing. You got our guy, we got your guy. Okay, let's go play baseball now. But then Severino went back out after the warnings were issued and threw at Justin Smoke, and that's what created the benches, and they were clearing, and it's never a pretty situation. And actually, the Blue Jays lost a couple of players at the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be my point. I mean, when you're that close, losing players in these fights is really, and the Orioles have had that. We lost Messina 20 years ago. I mean, I remember that was of your era, and, for a season you lose a guy. With the season on the line, I just figured you'd do anything you can do to avoid it. But clearly there's been bad blood, and, the Blue Jays have some emotional types on their team. There's no doubt about that. And I think there's sort of bad blood between these two teams, right?
Well, sure there is. There's a little bit of history, too, here. But, I think when teams meet up in situations like this, the fans can really relish that. And of course, the Blue Jays fans are dying for a win over the Orioles so that they can get the rematch with the Texas Rangers. And that's going to be a whole other story if it were to happen. But I think with the hit by pitches, the little war that went on there with the Yankees, again, it was brewing for a long time. And when that happens, things can escalate in a hurry. And it's a very emotional game. There's no question. And with the Orioles and Blue Jays history, you come into a game like this, I really believe it is a clean slate. But isn't it interesting you mentioned that? And that's why I'm very interested to hear if the Blue Jays do go to Marcus Stroman, because here's a younger pitcher with a lot of emotion. He's had his issues with Buck Showalter and with the Orioles. And that might be actually a bit of a reason why I would almost go with the more seasoned veteran in Francisco Liriano. Much more calming presence on the mound and good demeanor. And, Marcus is a great young arm. He's fantastic. He's very effective. He's had trouble against the Orioles lineup, there's no question. But I think, too, very excitable. And maybe Liriano may be the better choice with that being said as well.
You talk about the way this game's played, Joe, and because it's a one and done and trying to get an early run. I mean, the Orioles can't manufacture runs. I mean, they can't play that style. Let's go steal second base. Let's move runners. Let's bunt. Let's sack fly. I mean, this is a beer league softball team through and through. And if they hit a couple of home runs on Tuesday night, they'll probably win, right? If they don't, they probably won't win. I mean, that's kind of been the story for the Orioles most of the year, and I'm pretty sure they'll get a well-pitched game, all the way. And I think if anybody gets in trouble early, there'll be very, very quick hooks, whatever direction that these two managers go in.
Yeah, and you know what, though? When you look at the Blue Jays lineup, they're not very dissimilar. This is a very similar-looking offense.
But they hit a lot of doubles, though. They really do. I mean, they're not nearly as station-to-station as the Orioles, who were written about earlier as maybe the slowest team in the history of Major League Baseball.
Well, and I think, too, what the Blue Jays do is they draw walks. They've got some guys with some very keen eyes at the plate, and they draw a lot of walks, so that certainly creates more traffic on the base pass. But they've struggled this year, for me, two areas. Batting average is way down from last year when I talked about that prolific offense in 2015. And the other thing they've done is they've struck out an awful lot more. And that's a concern. And to me, I think you've got guys that are big hitters. It's a power-laden lineup. But there's times, and I'm not asking Edwin Encarnacion necessarily to shorten up and go the other way, but there's other guys throughout that lineup that probably could make better adjustments. We just have not seen it at times this season. But that, to me, is the reason for those strikeouts spiking so high and the batting average going so low. There's times this year, the Blue Jays dropped an 8-spot one inning out in Seattle just a couple of weeks ago, and it was just a different-looking approach. And I know Brooke Jacoby, the hitting coach, preaches it all the time, but it's hard to get that through to big league hitters to really try to change things up a bit. But when they do it, it's a different-looking offense, it's a dynamic-looking offense, and it's a lot more looking like the offense from last season. And I think the Blue Jays would have a lot more success with the bats if they could kind of took that approach. And again, not taking the power away from them. You're not asking Edwin and Donaldson to shorten up. But there's a lot of guys through that lineup can make adjustments. And, even if it's a Donaldson or an Edwin or a Bautista, maybe thinking more middle of the field instead of left field seats, that really helps because as hitters, they stay on the baseball a little bit longer. And you know what? Maybe it is a base hit up the middle or a base hit, a blooper to right center field, but it sure is a lot better than weak contact or roll over to the left side or a strikeout. I think that's been the issue. But very similar offenses still, I think, in a lot of ways. And the way you look at it, though, I got to believe in some way, shape, or form at the end of Tuesday night, this game is probably going to be decided with somebody's big swing of the bat.
No doubt about it. Joe Siddall joining us here from the Blue Jays broadcast team. Arts on the other side, Cleveland and Boston getting together. That's an interesting matchup as well, and we've seen enough of all of each other here over the last 8 weeks of the season. I thought the Red Sox were trending in the right direction. I'm a little worried about them, quite frankly.
Well, you know what? You've got Rick Porcello and David Price going games 1 and 2. I think the pitching issue in Cleveland is the concern, and we talked a little bit about it on the weekend too, and I'm sure Boston would have loved to open up at home, but Cleveland was able to seal that. And I think in a wild card game that the Blue Jays and the Orioles are playing, I think home field, and the Blue Jays are very glad to be home. I think it's a big deal with the great fans here, and it's going to be a packed house. But in a one game like that, I think it's less influential than in a series, and that's where I do think that will help the Indians. Now, there's a team that hasn't drawn real well, so maybe it's not a big deal as opposed to opening at Fenway Park. I think in a series, though, that can help. And I tell you what, we got through that weekend in Boston, and that lineup is just tenacious. I mean, the Orioles lineup can be tough, and I know they've been scuffling at times, but that Red Sox lineup is about as good as it gets. They can beat you so many different ways, and it starts right at the top with Pedroia. And it's going to be a challenge for Cleveland. There's no question. And I think especially with some of their big guys out, they're going to count on Kluber, of course, and Trevor Bauer probably throw a couple of games each. but they're going to have their hands full. That lineup, it was really such a grind. And it's interesting, too, from a broadcaster's perspective. You almost feel like you're on the field because you're feeling for the pitcher on the mound and how you just don't have any room for error. These guys grind out at bats like anyone. Marco Estrada in Game 1 of the series, he was over 100 pitches, and he barely got through his 6 innings. Like, it was just so difficult. We went 5 innings through over 100 pitches. He was making great pitches just off the outside corner, coming in, elevating, and they just foul balls off and foul balls off. And it's a grind for a pitcher, and that's how they get into bullpens too. But this is a tough lineup. And I know pitching usually wins championships, but I wouldn't bet against this Red Sox lineup. They're dangerous.
The last playoff game I saw in person in Toronto was watching Joe Carter circle the bases when the bombs were going off in there, and I was up in left field. A sad night for anybody who was a Phillies fan, a great night to be out on Yonge Street if you were young like I was. It was 1993, and you know, it was such an incredible baseball thing going on there, from that move, the Exhibition Stadium to the Sky Dome, and had it going on for that era, the sold out, the $3.6 million, all of that happened during that Cito Gaston era, and we're still pissed at him about the 93 All-Star game here, and don't think that hasn't come up this week, Joe. But I mean, in a hockey country that baseball has, in the last 15 months, sort of not just ignited Toronto, but ignited the country, this is a tough ticket on Tuesday night, and you waited a long time as a guy peddling baseball in a hockey country for baseball to be as significant as it is. This would be a real turd if the Blue Jays, fall behind 6-2 in the 4th inning and wind up losing to the Orioles and kind of go quietly, because the nation and the city's been ignited and they've led baseball in attendance this year. It's really kind of an incredible thing what winning has done in Kansas City, what winning has done in Toronto, but here in Baltimore, the Orioles can't catch a cold. Nobody wants to go to the games. Detroit, Cleveland, a little down. But in Toronto, it happened very, very quickly, like it did in Kansas City.
Yeah, it did. It was electric here last year, and I think really it was the trade deadline when Troy Tulowitzki came and then David Price came, and this team just took off. This was a team teetering around 500, if you remember, at the trade deadline last year. They shored up the bullpen. They shored up some areas, but I remember when the Troy Tulowitzki trade was announced, and my first thought was, what the heck? This team does not need more hitting. They need pitching. They need bullpen help. They need a starter. But little would we realize that he just absolutely shored up the infield defense. This guy is unbelievable. And I think playing in Colorado, we all know the name Troy Tulowitzki, but for us now to get a chance to watch this guy on a day-to-day basis, this guy is just some kind of pro. He is unbelievable. The way he plays the shortstop position, he's a bigger guy, always fielding the ball on the run, the off-balance throws, but boy, 99.9% of the time that throws right on the mark at first base as well. But I think what he has brought since that deadline was something special. It really helps the pitching. Of course, you bring in a David Price, it helps too, and they shored up the bullpen at the time too. But this country went crazy last year with this run that the Blue Jays made. It reflected in their ticket sales going into this season. The expectations were high, and that's why this weekend in Boston was so critical. If the Blue Jays miss out on this postseason berth, I really think it's an epic collapse because of where they were coming from and their expectations. Now, they got to the postseason. We all know that's the number one goal when everyone leaves spring training. So that's mission accomplished. If they were to lose the wild card game, it's going to be a major disappointment. There's no question, because they went to the ALCS last year. And it's almost like World Series or bust now because the expectations are so high. But I'll tell you what, this country is going to be rocking tomorrow night, and the hockey has taken a little bit of side. The Leafs are big here in Toronto, and camp is open, but it's going to be all baseball today and tomorrow, and hopefully for most of the month of October.
Well, I was really concerned for a long period of time. I'm a rather large Rush fan. Getty doesn't have a restraining order on me yet, but he could. He actually calls the show from time to time. He's such a great dude. Every time he's behind the plate, the Orioles lost before Thursday. So I felt like there was some sort of Geddy Lee jinx against the Orioles because, when he's behind home plate, I can't even concentrate on a game. It's Geddy Lee, We've exercised that Geddy Lee demon, at least on Thursday, so I'm not as worried about the Geddy Lee jinx.
Hey, whatever works, right? What a great guy and a great fan, though. I got a chance to meet him last year. I didn't realize he was such a big Blue Jays fan. But, yeah, it's a lot of fun here in Toronto. And, of course, the Raptors did well last year, too, so that was a lot of fun for the city. They're waiting for the Leafs to get going. But it's interesting what you made that comment about when you use the word country, and it is so true because it's a very unique situation for these Blue Jays players, and I spoke to some of them about that last year because it was the first time. Now they're doing it, a lot of them, for the second time. but it's a unique opportunity for a big league ball player. A lot of them play in big markets, the Chicagos, the LAs, the New Yorks, but none of those places are you playing for your country. And it's just really, it's unbelievable what they felt here. And the fans, it's crazy from coast to coast. And I'm sure you saw the outpouring of support in Seattle. When this team goes to Seattle, all the fans come from out Western Canada.
From Vancouver, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Like basically the Blue Jays fans took over Safeco Field. I mean, there may have been some Seattle fans sprinkled in there. It was the craziest I've ever seen. And went there during the week this year, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So much for work and school. They were there.
Took over Fenway Park over the weekend.
Pretty well. The fans didn't let them do it at Fenway, but I thought it was fantastic. We let it roll on the radio during our broadcast. It was Let's Go Blue Jays, Let's Go Red Sox, and I just think that's fantastic. I mean, what a great thing for baseball, what a great thing for both teams. But I tell you, the Blue Jays have this tremendous following. It's almost as though everywhere we go on the road, and it can be May, it can be July, where it can be midweek, weekend, there is this crazy following of Blue Jays fans. It's unbelievable. And then when you're anywhere close, and you've probably seen it in Baltimore, when we went to Cleveland, a lot of people get in their cars and they'd make the trek. And downtown Cleveland, it looks like downtown Toronto. Everybody's wearing Blue Jays gear. So it's been a following everywhere, and it's pretty special. And as I said, these guys are playing for a country now, and that's very unique in its own way.
I live in downtown Baltimore. I saw plenty of Blue Jays people sitting in corner bars drinking adult beverages here the couple of days you guys were here a couple weeks ago. Hey, man, it's always great having you on, Joe. North of the border, one game for all the marbles, America, Canada, Blue Jays, Orioles. It's almost like Cito Gaston all over again. So let all the bad vibes come out in 9 innings. And we still think about the 89 thing, right? Greg Olson and Pete Harnish stepping on the nail, and I mean we've never won a really big one with the Blue Jays. So this is this would exercise a lot of demons for a lot of old folk like me that've been watching this for 30 years.
Well, hopefully for the fans on both sides, it's a great game. It'd probably be a real downer if somebody took off and run in a blowout. I don't see that happening, but I think both pitchers will be well prepared. But I just have this inkling that one of these lineups that's been kind of cold may just break out, because you just can't seem to hold these lineups down this long, and I'm sure it could happen in one of these, but I still see some kind of battle that goes deep into this ball game. Should be a great one, and hope everyone enjoys it.
Joe, keep the faith, man. Great coming on. Appreciate the time, man. And it's almost hockey season. I'll bother you about that later.
Hey, all right, man, my pleasure.
You got it. Joe Siddall, Blue Jays broadcaster. You can follow him out on Twitter at Siddall Joe. That's Siddall Joe. He's been on the Blue Jays team and also a big leaguer. And it was a long time fighting the good fight between the minors and the big leagues and making it work there. Siddall Joe out on Twitter. Orioles and the Blue Jays for all the marbles. It's Game 7. It's Game 1. It's all that. It's the wild card game. We'll be at Owings Mills, Buffalo Wild Wings, like we are on Monday nights for our best seat in the house. We are having a viewing party in Owings Mills at the Buffalo Wild Wings on Tuesday night. Come on out and join us. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. I am a very available individual. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere the internet is served. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.